It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again, time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 283. Tonight I'm joined by Ammo.
Hello.
Ashgar.
Hi.
Kodra.
Hi.
Tam.
Hello.
And Thalen.
Hello.
Distracted by AGDQ.
Kicking it old school.
So, yeah, we've got another big show in the works, and as part of it, I think collectively we started talking about how big of a decade this has been for tabletop gaming. Because, like...
So big.
So in some ways, like, this has been the decade when it has become normal to play tabletop games. You know, because, like, growing up in my childhood, it was very much not normal to play tabletop games.
No, it was the way to get accused of trying to summon Satan. It was the work of the devil. And I was the cool house, and everyone hid their dice at my house. So yeah, like it is so surreal for me to see where tabletop gaming is right now. By comparison, I had a conversation with a high schooler today who had, like, in passing mentioned the D&D game that he was playing as if, like, with the expectation that I would just know what he was talking about immediately and understand it, and he could it didn't need to explain it, would just move on. Yeah. The way that
everybody plays in at least one D&D game now.
Right. The way some would be like, I play soccer in my free time.
What a weird sequence of events we've ended up with. And I'm on board with this.
It's been a huge year for it.
Huge year, huge decade.
Huge decade for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's been some combination of virtual tabletops, the release of D&D 5th Ed, and Kickstarter.
I honestly, I feel that the ball started rolling in this direction with 3rd edition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's been 2 decades ago almost. But that was the moment which 3rd edition kiosks were everywhere. There was a freaking 3rd edition kiosk in Walmart. And I remember, like, there was a huge section devoted to the release at, like, Barnes & Noble and Borders and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I had ever experienced, like, D&D being a thing that, like, wasn't crammed in a niche, like, shop that was in a bad area of town with low visibility to go buy your books. Like, sure, Walden Books during the 80s had gaming material, but it was very much crammed into the very, very back corner of the shop and was unmentioned. But 3rd really was like, oh crap, this is serious. Like this is getting advertising and publicity.
I mean, the first time I knew anything about 3rd was because I saw Books and Borders.
Yep.
I mean, that was the point at which our Barnes & Noble, like, went from having less than a shelf worth of role-playing stuff to an entire case spilling over into a 2nd. And admittedly, part of that was because I actively made sure we ordered at least one of everything. But then it turned out that we were selling that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the craziest thing. If we actually have it in stock, there are people that want to buy that.
So D&D 3rd edition released in 2000, right?
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
And was supplanted by 4th in 2007.
Except not really.
Yeah.
So this is actually gonna be sort of my take on it. And again, I love the company, so that's definitely part of it. But the existence of big competition to Wizards in the form of Paizo is, like, definitely is a thing that I think caused them to reevaluate, take stock, and really come back strong.
See, it's interesting because I think White Wolf would have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Well,
White Wolf was arguably bigger than Wizards prior to 3rd Ed.
Yeah.
Well,
Like, Vampire the Masquerade was the big thing.
It was
huge. But that's not stuff that
that was
White
sort
Wolf?
of even more niche.
No,
Yeah,
it was
that was-
also
that
weird.
was-
It was also
No.
weird and strange, but
No.
it was less
It was
niche and more
older.
just weird.
My point is, White Wolf was not relevant at the turn of this decade.
Right.
No, that's true.
I mean, and
so-
these events, like you're saying with Paizo, I mean, the divorce of Wizards of the Coast and Paizo has changed the landscape because, quite honestly, like back when 3rd edition released, it was Paizo that was really doing interesting things with
Paizo,
3rd edition and publishing like the promotional material in the form of Dungeon and Dragon magazine that was like giving us interesting think pieces on like paladins of every alignment, or here's 10 different kinds of druids.
Paizo would have been happy to just release supplemental content up until the part that they were completely locked out of that market, which is what happened with 4th.
Yeah, it's super interesting because you can sort of trace it back. Like White Wolf is a 90s prop, was the thing in the 90s and was even more mainstream than D&D because it was competing with AD&D. And like 3rd edition D&D was clearly a response to White Wolf basically eating their lunch.
Oh yeah,
right.
Because D&D was gaming for accountants, and Vampire the Masquerade was gaming for theater nerds.
Yeah, and what's really, really interesting is that one of the big things that I think 3rd Ed introduced was the open game license.
Yep.
Which is what basically made Paizo possible.
3rd edition was
Absolutely.
also the moment at which Wizards started caring about art direction in the D&D product line. Because quite honestly, like, art direction was not good prior to 3rd edition. Like,
I mean, there was good art, but there was also really terrible art.
There was good art, but it was mostly in the form of, like, fold-out, high-color prints with not amazing art illustrating the rest of the book, and it mostly being black and white, whereas 3rd edition was like a full color magazine style experience, and from that point forward it's just continued. Like that's been what a D&D book looks like,
and that's part of why role-playing books are $60 now.
Yeah, it's just funny. Like, okay, so if you think White Wolf was a response to D&D, you can say the exact same thing with Games Workshop and D&D, because Games Workshop originally was just a supplement maker for Redbox era D&D.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that, and they had the license to sell D&D in Britain,
right? And
then they were like, maybe we should make our own game and sell that instead.
So the rise of Pathfinder and Paizo as a publishing like a competitor, like this has happened several times in the history of D&D.
I think the main difference was because of the open game license, there were so many supplement makers that, I mean, and the vast majority of them didn't really go anywhere. Like, they hung around for a while and then they, died off or what have you.
Also, a lot of them were bad.
A lot of them were very bad, yes.
Well, it's really interesting to me because I feel like Paizo took a tack that most other OGL builders didn't. Because a lot of the open game license books were, here's new classes and mechanics and a setting, but not, here is an adventure here's an adventure to make the job of being the DM easy.
Yeah.
And I think
it
that's the thing.
It tended to be more crunch and...
Yeah. It was like, here's some more crunch, here's some more rules, and sure, maybe your favorite whatever is in, maybe your favorite thing is in one of these like super niche books, but Paizo came at it from a completely different perspective of, hey, being a DM is hard and a lot of work. Can we reduce that and make the entire genre more accessible? Yeah,
and so one of the things that I've been doing is playing a bunch of Paizo mods. Like, that's how I do DMing, and I don't necessarily have a huge amount of interest or the successful bandwidth. Like, I have not proved successful in my attempts of running a game. But when I have a module, I can run a game and I can be a GM, which is like, if you look at the population of people playing these games, people are more likely to be players than GMs. And so anything that eases that encourages more games to happen in general.
Yeah.
Like, I know Tam basically always gets roped into being the GM for whatever game we play because that's what he's good at, and nobody else is like the most comfortable at that role. So being able to say
there's whole systems that I've never gotten to play. I'd love to, but I've never gotten to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was my childhood, was basically being the GM because nobody else wanted to, and it was hard enough to get enough players to play in the first place, let alone try and talk one of them into GMing.
Yeah. I don't actually even know how to make a character in 7th Sea or Star Wars, any Star Wars RPG, because I've never done it. I've never played a character.
You know, speaking of Star Wars, you mentioned that you were reading the Old West End Star Wars recently.
Yeah, boy, I'd
run that for you.
I would play it.
I ran so much West End Star Wars back in the day, and it's not a perfect system, but it works pretty well. And there's lots and lots of material for it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stood out to me about that one, I understand why every Star Wars RPG that's been made since then, because I was like, okay, Saga Edition came out in what, 2010?
Something like that.
Really? Saga Edition feels like the D&D 4 playtest.
Sorry, 2007. You're right.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. Well, it's, yeah. I was getting my dates mixed up. But like Star Wars Saga was, I like it a lot, but it's like weirdly cramming D&D functionality into Star Wars, and like doesn't necessarily, like, I like the system. There's a lot of crunch to it, but if you like crunch, there's a lot of crunch to be had.
I think I do like it better than the Fantasy Flight one, although I like some parts of the Fantasy Flight thing better.
Yeah, and the Fantasy Flight one is interesting but weird, and it's sort of hard to parse. But I understand why both of those are the way they are, because the West End version just works.
Yep.
Like, it's simple, it's straightforward. If you want to, it lets you do the thing you want, which is play the Star Wars character of your choice.
It's also playable with dice you can get from the dollar store.
Yep, it's entirely D6s. Building a character is really straightforward. I mean, honestly, you can just grab one of the templates from the back of the book and run one of those.
Yeah.
Make it the character that you want it to be.
It's super accessible. It's as accessible as sitting down and watching a Star Wars movie, which seems like a great goal to have. It makes me think a lot about White Wolf games. Like, it's not a 1-to-1, but there's definitely
I definitely think, West End was inspiration for White Wolf, because like it feels super similar, and they even released a generic system called the D6 system that was portable to do anything.
Yeah, because that was the same system that they used, I mean, with slight modifications for the Indiana Jones role-playing game, for the Men in Black role-playing game. I want to say for the Ghostbusters one. No, Ghostbusters was TSR, wasn't it? But like basically all of the games that West End did used modifications of that system.
Yeah.
Sadly, Star Wars was the only one that really ever hit it big, to a great degree, because they were basically the keepers of the Star Wars lore until Timothy Zahn came along.
Well, there's even West End Zahn books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's super interesting to me to see the ebb and flow of, like, D&D was getting too complicated and unwieldy with AD&D, and White Wolf came and had a much simpler, much more accessible system that appealed to people who wanted to. There's no judgment in this statement, but appealed to people who wanted to play characters more than do math.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, original D&D and AD&D up through 2nd Ed were very, very clearly created by wargamers.
Yeah, and as a wargamer, I want something else out of my D&D experience, largely. And then you see Paizo, who that I mean, most of their stuff was in third ed and on. And when did Pathfinder 1 originally come out?
Shortly after or shortly before D&D 4.
Yeah,
because its whole thing was
entirely contemporary with D&D 4.
Yeah, because it was entirely here's a game for people that want to keep playing D&D 3, but with like updates.
Well, just like Hackmaster was a game for people who wanted to continue playing AD&D.
Yep.
Yeah. And
it was 2009, so a little after 4th edition.
Yeah.
So I will say there was it was basically just, here's some modules you can play with 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some rules you can tack onto 3.5 before they released the first thing, Pathfinder. It was very much, hey, we're not going to get the version of Dungeons and Dragons supported. No one's going to play 3.5 anymore, so we need to come up with our own version of it so that we can support it and carry it forward.
Yeah, and I have a lot of mixed feelings, mostly negative, about Pathfinder 1, because while I like the direction of use the creation of modules to make the game more accessible, 3.5 had a lot of problems, and I don't feel like Pathfinder fixed any of them.
No.
Well, I mean, Pathfinder was really a situation where Paizo had a mountain of material that they could recycle from the magazines, and then that suddenly wasn't available when the divorce happened.
I mean, mechanically, all of the editions of D&D 5 prior to 5th have some issues.
It's
5th
true.
also has some issues, just smaller ones.
Yeah.
Mostly.
And I think that was a big part of my frustration with Pathfinder, was that it felt like there wasn't even an attempt to fix foundational issues, because there wasn't.
I mean, no, they wanted to keep all as much 3.5 material as possible compatible with this.
Yeah, like they had, their audience was people who want to keep playing D&D 3.5, and don't change any of the rules. We want those rules, including the broken stuff.
That is why they have a new edition now, so they could get off of that ridiculous base. But we're skipping ahead a bit, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's the, like, it's really clear that, well, I feel like it's relatively clear that 4th edition was not what anybody was hoping.
Fourth edition was very much in response to World of Warcraft.
Yes. Yeah, 4th edition was Fourth edition was in response to World of Warcraft.
And it was the game that they hoped would bring it out into the mainstream, and it didn't.
No.
Well,
so mad that we never got any tactical games based on that rule set, because it would have been great for that specifically, but it's
absolutely
not tabletop RPG.
Yeah, which is, it's so weird to me, because yes, that
isn't Neverwinter based on 4th?
Neverwinter is technically based on 4th, but it's not based on the 4th edition rule set.
Yeah, because like the 4th edition rule set would probably make better tactical RPGs than like Final Fantasy Tactics, or at least equally good.
Yep.
And it's crazy weird to me that never happened.
But anyway, beginning of the decade, we have Pathfinder, which is doing okay. We have 4th edition D&D, which is not doing well. They, I think, made several more attempts to revitalize it with the Essentials line, and it didn't really work.
Yeah.
I don't actually remember where World of Darkness was in 2010.
Limbo.
I mean, they did a horrible reboot of the world.
Had CCP bought them yet in 2010? I don't think they had.
I don't think so, but that happened early this decade.
So New World of Darkness was dropped in the mid-2000s to tepid reviews.
They started revamping the old World of Darkness books. Onyx Path was basically happened at the start of this decade.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone other than, I think, like Tam, I think you liked it, didn't you? The World of Darkness reboot.
I like the rules to New World of Darkness better than the old one.
Yes, that one. That thing.
Okay, yeah. I thought the world design was worse.
Yes.
I didn't know this yet, but I later went back and read some stuff, and yes, absolutely.
The original World of Darkness stuff was fascinating and super cool, and the rules were a nightmare, but like you kind of weren't playing, like the rules were there as a framework for you to play your character and do stuff as your character, not for you to try to optimize anything, because it just fell over pretty quick if you ever tried.
Mm-hmm. Well, and honestly, most of the people playing World of Darkness, original WoD, were playing rock, paper, scissors.
Basically, yeah. And so, like, New World of Darkness made better systems, but at the cost of the world that was interesting.
Yeah, they blew up the entire setting, and it just, yeah.
And didn't replace it with anything that was, like...
As interesting. Yeah,
it wasn't as... It was too constrained and too specific in all of the places where you don't want it to be, and then there wasn't enough coverage for the things that you really wanted, like, detail on. And so, like, you know, outside of Pathfinder, which was pretty niche, D&D 4th, which wasn't that big, and New World of Darkness, like, the start of this decade was not necessarily a great place for tabletop games, like tabletop RPGs. And then D&D 5 happened.
I mean,
like,
several things happened. Some things happened before that. In 2011, White Wolf decided they should start republishing Old World of Darkness and separate New World of Darkness.
Yes, which I don't know. I don't know how. Like, they republished it, and I feel like them republishing it only really put into perspective that New World of Darkness wasn't as good, which is weird to me. But yeah, I forgot that they announced further books for their old system. What else was before?
5th edition wanted to play testing in
2012.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing that I remember.
We did play the play test long before the thing came out.
Yeah, that was the thing that I remember, was that D&D 5 did a big playtest, and I think that's the first time I've even seen a big playtest for an upcoming RPG.
Well, I mean, it makes sense in this case, because 4th edition was really not well received, and I don't think they wanted to fail twice.
Yeah, which is, you know, a good choice to make. But it was...
But definitely a non-traditional one in the space.
Yeah, it was a non-traditional direction to go. But
funny now, though, in the days of early access.
But it was also really exciting, because it was like, okay, let's take a step back from 4th edition. What if 3rd edition, but accessible? Like, what if we made 3rd edition, but not drowning in complicated mechanics and multiple layers of decision trees that you have to suss out in excruciating detail to even have a functional character? Like, what if you could just roll some dice and play? You make a few choices early on, but then mostly what it's about is playing your character. And so they kept a decent amount of the kind of tactical focus of 4th with the extremely streamlined character creation that served World of Darkness games so well. And it felt like they also learned a bunch of lessons from Paizo about making the game more accessible for everybody. And boy, did that take off.
I think also there was kind of a general fantasy surge around the same time, because, you know, Harry Potter became huge. Game of Thrones, like, very early in the decade, became a thing.
I remember the thing where 2 years after 5th edition's launch, more of 5th edition had sold than every previous edition combined.
Well, so there's a couple of other cultural things that were happening here. Like, we kind of alluded to streaming. Like, this, when did Critical Role happen?
I want to say that was a little later. That's in, I guess it started in 2015.
Didn't Acquisitions start first?
Yes, it did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, and then actual play on podcasts.
But like pen and paper as a spectator sport was something I never expected to happen.
Oh yeah,
and I still don't
2016.
fully get it. Like, I'm not a consumer of it, but like,
yeah.
I know a bunch of people that do, and they love it.
I know people who don't even play D&D who watch it. They're like, no, it's not a game I play. Or I'll talk to people who are like, oh, I've watched some of the shows, but I never thought I'd play myself. That sounds like a really cool idea, but I don't know if I know how to do it. But like, can you? I can honestly say that I would not have expected the existence of a person who knew about D&D from watching shows where people played it but didn't play themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I would watch Critical Role, the animated series, if that were a thing that condensed basically the storyline. I don't know.
Pretty sure that's happening.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's happening.
And yeah, the other big piece of it was there was streaming, and there were successful virtual tabletops.
That word "successful" is real important.
There are a lot of virtual tabletops that tried to get going, but none of them were good. until Fantasy Grounds, basically.
Basically, Fantasy Grounds. My tabletop does technically still exist, but I'm not sure why you would use it.
I mean, I feel like Roll20, though, was a major move forward because you could just do it, and it was built on something else that was super easy to use, Google Hangouts.
Yeah.
And outlived Google Hangouts, huh?
Yeah.
It did outlive Google Hangouts.
Yep.
But yeah, you've got Fantasy Grounds, and Fantasy Grounds was great if you wanted to play a role-playing game made by Paizo or Wizards of the Coast. Or it was basically those two. And I think there's a bunch of more stuff now.
I was going to say it worked pretty good for Star Wars, but that was actually by Wizards. I forgot that.
Yep.
Well, and Wizards itself struggled with trying to come up with a virtual tabletop for a really long time.
Wizards was really bad at the
internet. They still haven't done it. I mean, now they have no need to, but they promised one for fourth, and that didn't happen.
Well, and they promised one for third that was
that
was going to be built by Troika on top of that engine, and that never happened.
Wait, Troika?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my god.
They were licensing tech from Troika. God, I'm dropping the name in my head of what that game was. That was their Fallout style game.
Okay, wait. Troika, the poster child for high concept, but maybe not so much execution.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The original dungeon creator that was going to get turned into their virtual tabletop was built on Arcanum, yeah.
Yeah, because they did Arcanum. Then they did the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yes.
D&D game that was not good.
I loved
And they
Arcanum.
did Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
Huh.
Which is probably the best game they did.
I mean, it's the one that people still play.
Thanks to
still has an active mod community.
Thanks to modding fixing issues.
I loved Arcanum, to be honest, but
Arcanum was pretty great.
I also recognize that game was deeply flawed in a large number of ways.
Yeah, I remember there was an issue of Dragon Magazine going into detail about how they were working with Troika to build the next dungeon generator. So that you could do a virtual tabletop, and it showed screenshots of it. It was mostly just the builder that Troika used for their own games, but and I think it was even alpha tested. I vaguely remember getting in and alpha testing it, and it had an IRC chat kind of functionality.
Then that's farther than they got with fourth or fifth, where fourth was just a trailer. It didn't exist beyond that, as far as I know. And fifth, they hired another company to do it, and then separated contact with that company after 3 or 4 months, if I remember correctly.
I mean,
so
I
it
think
never happened.
The closest we had to a virtual tabletop was probably Neverwinter Nights.
People did use it like that.
I sure did.
I absolutely did. I learned C scripting for that game. I had all sorts of random stuff going on in that game, and built tools for it.
I learned to write C script in real time for that game. P.S. Don't ever do that. It's not a good idea.
I decided to build EverQuest raids in Neverwinter with drop tables and randomized drops and a token loot system that you turned in.
I have zero difficulty believing this.
It was a thing I did.
But Fantasy Grounds came along and was actually good.
Yep. Roll20. And then Kickstarter happened.
Kickstarter did happen.
And wow.
Kickstarter did a lot of things for a lot of things.
Yes. Kickstarter made a lot of things really happen. And as it turns out, while maybe you shouldn't necessarily use Kickstarter for your video game, Kickstarter is real good for physical tabletop games.
Well, it's extra good for physical tabletop games designed by people who've actually published a thing before.
Yeah.
So they already know how all of that stuff works and know, how much money they actually need.
And I feel like another influence that really helped this decade, though, was Humble Bundle. Because there were a lot of role-playing game bundles where for $10 to $15 you could get the entire series run of a thing and basically have a campaign in a box.
Oh, I see what you mean, where it's there's a bunch of...
$10 to get every single Pathfinder book.
Right, yeah. Exactly. Or every single original World of Darkness book.
Yeah, just the rise of digital distribution of RPG books in general. But like Humble Bundle did a lot of that, and there's a bunch of other places that started doing a lot more of that. I mean, Paizo being a notable one.
Well,
you can just buy their books for PDF.
Yeah, I mean, Drive-Thru RPG like transitioned from being kind of a sketchy storefront with not the highest quality product to being like really high quality, and like the things that you get from there actually are fully useful.
Wizards still seems to be hesitant to engage in that market, but oh well.
Yeah,
they're at least willing to sell PDFs of their really old stuff, so that's something.
Also, their modules. They will sell PDFs for some of their modules.
Yeah, but like you can get a vast majority of Redbox D&D digitally now, which is nice.
I tell you when I knew things were changing. Like there's an exact moment, and it would have been 2012, I think. It's when I was in Target, and for the very first time, I saw a D&D box set in Target. Like that was kind of game changing.
Oh yeah.
And like selling polyhedral dice.
Mm-hmm.
My similar experience was seeing that Settlers of Catan was in like Target and Walmart.
Yep.
Because those types of games have also had a massive explosion of popularity recently.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing, is it's like at some point in the last 10 years, a lot more people have discovered, like, European board games made their way to the US and promptly exploded.
I mean, I feel like it is not a wrong statement to say that a lot of this expansion is due to Will Wheaton and the Tabletop show on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like bringing in Hollywood
helped
people to sit down and play these board games and walk you through in a few minutes the setup, making them non-obtuse and easy to adapt to. And like, if you want to know how to play a game, oh, well, there's an episode on YouTube that you can watch for a few minutes and get the gist enough to be able to play this thing you just bought with your friend.
Yeah, the whole Geek and Sundry channel.
Yeah. Well, and the more of that happening, leading to more of like Vin Diesel talking about how he plays D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly a completely different audience of people is like, wait, what? I want to do what Vin Diesel does.
I was going to say,
Vin Diesel has always been a nerd, and I'm glad people are paying attention to it now.
Yeah, because he was talking about that like
Vin
more
Diesel
than 10 years ago. He
Yeah,
was talking about
Vin
that
Diesel
back when
was
he was doing
talking
Triple
about that
X.
in 2003.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, yeah. But
at that point, it was very much those of us who already knew about D&D were like, "That's cool. Vin Diesel like plays D&D, and apparently like is a really nice guy and good at it, and that's neat." And now it's like, oh, D&D. I like the average person on the street has heard of it, and then is aware that these people whose films he that they like play it. Like, oh, maybe I'll try it.
Yeah,
it's been the decade of gamers feeling comfortable coming out of the closet, especially the tabletop gamer.
And a lot of that,
I think just the fact that those of us who were teenagers when this stuff was relatively new are adults now and have some money to spend at least, and
Well, and I think part of it too is the 2000s primed an entire generation of young adults that grew up watching like the Lord of the Rings series or the Harry Potter series. Like that was a decade of epic storytelling that makes you want to go find more of it.
Yeah. How did I leave out Lord of the Rings before? Like that was really that was really the beginning, and that was the point where like, yeah, you saw the Lord of the Rings movies and you really liked them. How about a game that lets you
be whichever Lord of the Rings character you like?
Yeah, pretend that you're one of those characters and go on adventures.
Well, and wasn't there even a port of the Middle-earth system to 3rd edition? I vaguely remember that. I know there was a Call of Cthulhu port to 3rd edition.
There was a D20 Call of Cthulhu. I don't think there was a D20 MERP, but
I feel like it's safe to assume there's a D20 everything, though.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff got ported to the D20 system.
It's really interesting to me that despite that like massive cultural touchstone, both of those massive cultural touchstones in Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, there hasn't really been a successful capitalization on that. Like, nobody's made a Harry Potter RPG and had it be terribly successful.
I thought there was a fairly successful Lord of the Rings RPG, however.
I think it was okay.
It was not amazing. I mean, it's
from the current one.
Oh, I don't know what the current one is. The only one I had experience is the one that dates back to the Tunnels and Troll era of games.
Yeah,
the second wave. One. Yeah, like the second wave of post D&D RPGs.
Okay, Cubicle 7 made one in 2016.
Okay, I have no experience with that.
Heard is pretty good, but have not played.
Is that One Ring?
No, that's Adventures in Middle-earth.
Oh, that's an even newer one.
So so they did one in 2011. Oh yeah, there was one by Decipher in 2002. I don't think it really won an Origins Award.
Decipher. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Due to some criticism of the game for its lack of balance.
Well.
Man, I was a diehard Star Wars card game player.
Didn't we already discuss that game's lack of balance?
I mean, I did have Jawas invade the Death Star on the regular.
Look, it was a thing.
Define balance?
The Star Trek version also had its problems.
When did Fantasy Flight really take off?
That would have been the early part of this decade.
Because that's
before then.
Because they, like, their big breakout hit, like, their big breakout thing was limited card games.
I mean, the first thing, when I became aware of them, was when they did the Lord of the Rings board game.
I became aware of them for Netrunner, which was 2012.
So they did a Game of Thrones in 2003. Android Netrunner was right at the turn of, was 2012.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings was 2000. That was when I became aware of them. And then D&D 3rd Ed, they did some stuff for it.
They do a lot of the heavy lifting on some of the Forgotten Realms product line?
I don't know.
Didn't think so. Maybe. Oh, and then Arkham Horror in 2005.
I was gonna say, so
there's that.
I feel like this decade is less about Euro board games coming to and becoming dominant, and more about American board game companies and non-Euro games becoming super dominant.
That's fair.
The 2000s, the early aughts is that's when I would say, oh, that was the sort of European game became super popular. Lots of people knew what Catan was.
Yeah.
And then this is the decade where it's you get games like Gloomhaven, you get a lot more of what gets derisively talked about in gaming circles as Ameritrash becomes much more popular.
Well, and it's in a lot of cases, it's hey, can we take a game inspired by one that's got really interesting systems but a really boring premise? Hello, Farming Games. And
I'm glad we can have worker placement games that are more interesting than Agricola.
Right. I love Agricola, but I love Agricola, and it was a novelty that it was about something really boring when I first played it. But also, we have games that are mechanically just as good or better with more interesting premises. And a lot of those premises have been, American board game developers or non-European board game developers coming up with interesting ideas and applying them to rules templates that have been proven. Okay, yes. So I'm looking at Fantasy Flight's back catalog, and it's basically they've had a bunch of stuff through the 2000s, and then the stuff that really took off and got really big: Mansions of Madness, Eldritch Horror, Elder Sign.
I was gonna kind of throw in the Netrunner remake as what I thought was sort of their watershed moment.
Yep.
Well, that was the beginning of the limited card games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing that happened this decade that's interesting and probably worth note is the beginning of the quote-unquote legacy games, where the game evolves over time.
The Risk Legacy
Yes,
effect.
It's hilarious to me that started
Pandemic Legacy. Yeah, I mean, the one I know the most is Pandemic, but there's a bunch of games that are doing this thing.
Risk Legacy was the first, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's just silly, by the way. I don't even like Risk.
Dude, Risk players are serious business about
No,
Risk.
so I don't. Has anyone here actually played Risk Legacy?
I have not.
I have not.
I'm not.
I played
I'm
a
not
lot
allowed
of
to
the-
play Risk.
I played a lot
I-
of Risk back in the day.
I understand.
I did
that-
too. I'm not allowed to play Risk.
I understand that it is very unlike playing just normal Risk.
It is almost completely different.
That sounds like a positive to me.
Yes.
Like,
Honestly, I think Risk Legacy, the reason Risk Legacy did not just become a complete barn burner is because it had the name Risk attached to it.
yes, I have that opinion too, because it took a lot of talking, it took a lot of convincing to get me to try it, and then I did, and I was like, oh, this is actually real good.
Well, I mean, the beginning of this decade was also the condensing of brands. Like, the reason why you can't hardly buy a marker that's not named Sharpie, even though all of those markers used to have their own names. Like, that was a thing that happened at the beginning of this decade as well, and I can see that might have happened with, Mattel and Risk just becoming lots of other things, because I also remember a Risk game that was all futuristic that played nothing like Risk, and I don't remember the name of it.
There was one that had the moon. There was also a Lord of the Rings Risk that was better balanced than original Risk.
They made an Elder Scrolls Risk last year.
The other thing that happened right at the start of the decade, and I think was really important, was the launch of X-Wing, because prior to Fantasy Flight getting in there and launching X-Wing, the state of miniatures games was Games Workshop pretty much resting on its laurels, and other minis games carving out niches in the market, but not really fundamentally reimagining what the play space looked like, with a few exceptions of skirmish games were getting pretty big in the late aughts. Because the idea of, hey, what if we had a minis game and you didn't have to spend hundreds of dollars up front just to try it, was really exciting for entirely reasonable reasons. And then you have X-Wing, which is like, hey, it's a skirmish game, so you don't need that many models. Also, these models are beautiful. We used the original models from the Star Wars trilogy as our baseline for each of these miniatures. They are pre-painted. This is purely a game. This is not a hobby. You're going to get a beautiful looking board instantly.
Well, I mean, X-Wing took what Crimson Skies did in the early 2000s, but had some jank rules and never quite made mass adoption and made it just work and easy to pick up and not broken in certain circumstances, or less broken in certain circumstances than Crimson Skies was.
Yeah.
Because Crimson Skies was an amazing game, and it came out, I think, in 2003. But
Crimson Skies, and then Wings of War.
Like, it never really got mass adoption.
Yeah. And HeroClix had proven that there was an appetite for that kind of thing. And HeroClix was really, really big. But, like, the minis were never terribly good quality.
They got better over time, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of minis where it's like, oh, hey, this mini is a super niche version of this character that I thought nobody but me remembered. And so it's cool to have it, like, rendered in tiny plastic. But, like, they weren't great.
But also his eyes look like two overdone fried eggs.
Right. And for a lot of people who like miniatures games, myself included, my opinion was largely that pre-painted minis look like garbage. Like, sure, they're pre-painted, but you kind of wish they weren't, because they weren't good. They were like kind of blobby messes in almost every case. And then X-Wing was like, no, actually, check these out. These look better than anything I can personally accomplish with even better metal or plastic minis and a paintbrush.
Well, and the whole HeroClix concept fixed a massive problem with tabletop wargaming. Like, I can remember back in the day, one of the first things we did when we got like a new edition of Warhammer is we would split the spine and put it in sheet protectors, because by God, we would have to have that for every match that was ever played. because there were so many rules for the miniatures that you had to drag out the tome every time you did anything.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, if I have this miniature and it has everything that I need to know on the base of the miniature, that's revolutionary.
Yeah. And HeroClix got unwieldy because it had too much iconography.
Mm-hmm. Well, and right before this decade, they also started just like branching out into everything that they could possibly sell for $1. Horror clicks, like sci-fi clicks, and like movie crossovers for various click miniatures, giant monsters that were unrealistic that anyone would ever play with them on the table.
Yeah. And I was like, they looked cool, but you'd never actually use them. But I also feel like X-Wing, in addition to bringing a whole bunch of people who probably weren't that interested in minis games before because of the hobby aspect, into miniatures games, and really lit a fire under all of the other miniatures games producers to really think about what they're doing. Because now it's like, okay, we've got Star Wars, which is huge, and a super accessible, play right out of the box game. That requires serious competition. And a lot of miniatures games have spent this decade dramatically, or at least attempting to dramatically up their game, as it were.
Well, and if anything else, like, I feel like this is the decade of accessibility, because in a lot of cases we're talking about things, and I can think of examples where there was a thing that was pretty good prior to this decade, but someone broke through with critical mass because they managed to take that thing and package it up in a way that was way more accessible. Like, so you're talking about X-Wing. Like, I remember that the Babylon 5 miniatures game was really good. It was almost impossible to find the miniatures because there was constantly stocking problems. The rules were obtuse, but it did combat really well. But X-Wing just makes it simple. Like, oh, I'm going to pick up some miniatures, and there's going to be some basic rules that I need to refer to every so often, but I can just play, and and the other aspect of this is almost the Friday Night Magic aspect, because it's real easy to go watch somebody play X-Wing and then pick up a viable pack of miniatures and immediately start playing.
Yeah. You could do that in the store while you'd be like, oh, that game looks cool.
Halfway through the night, yeah, like, okay, I'm going to go buy some figures, and now I'm playing.
Yeah, I'm going to grab them, rip open the boxes, I have everything I need to play, and we're going to go.
And that was not something you could do with any other tabletop gaming.
Yeah.
Because, like, oh, well, even if you only assembled the miniatures.
First.
Well, like, even if you only assembled and played them bare metal, like, it's still some time to assemble miniatures.
Yeah. I mean, you'd hear stories of people at tournaments who, because they were so practiced, purchased and painted a single miniature for a tournament. And that was like a big deal.
So I can talk about this a little bit because I knew some competitive War Machine people when the what's it called came out, the giant robots, the Colossals. Those came out at Gen Con. There was a tournament at Gen Con that required painted minis, and there were people who absolutely bought 2 Colossals for their I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 Colossals for their army. And I'm pretty sure they were playing Syra, and constructed and painted it to run in a tournament. And, like, they spent an entire day of their Gen Con doing that.
Yeah, because it's not a small task.
I also know people that were playing in a tournament and bought a miniature, assembled it quickly, and then slapped a single color of paint on and ran with it, because it was technically a painted mini at that point.
It's painted now. Use the Snake Eyes color scheme.
Yes.
Deal with it.
It's green.
I think also in the past decade in particular, there has been maybe a calming of the people playing these games. Like, a willingness to be less intense about it. I don't know. Maybe
don't
it's just
know
that
if
there are so many more people, and lots of the new people just haven't gotten that intense about it.
Well, so I don't know. The thing I have noticed around here is a lot of those old guard of angry white men have gotten pissed at the dilution of their stores and are no longer playing there.
Oh, boo-hoo.
And as a result, they are more tolerable environments.
Uh-huh.
So I think they're still there. It's just I think there's too many people entering the fray for them to matter anymore.
Yeah, I think it's less that the existing players who were like that stopped, and more that so many new players have come in and they have been brought in by things like, Critical Role and the like, where they're actually playing the roles of their characters and are making a story.
Well, and there's a lot more new stores and stores that are untainted by a legacy of things being a certain way.
Yeah.
I also think that the games themselves have, like, White Wolf figured this out in the 90s, where they were like, oh, hey, if we make this game inclusive, we get a whole bunch more players. And it worked for them for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these other games took them a while, but they're leaning really hard into that, being like, no, look, we're going to have, you were talking about how there was a lot of art suddenly being a focus, and that's definitely true. And they're very careful and very intentional with their art to be like, hey, look, here's a wide variety of types of people. This game is for everybody. And like in more recent D&D and the most recent edition of Pathfinder, which we haven't talked about yet, they're explicit about them. It's like
Pathfinder is a dwarf that looks like George Clinton.
It was what?
Pathfinder is a dwarf that looks like George Clinton. It is sort of unthinkable that you would see that sort of thing in a D&D book before.
Yeah.
But this decade, if nothing else, has proven that if you make your games accessible, if you make them inclusive, like, you will do better. You will have more of an audience. It will grow, and like there will be lots of tack-on effects of that are positive for the entirety of the hobby, the game, whatever.
The more people you appeal to, the more people buy your game.
Yep.
And as somebody who struggled constantly trying to find enough people to play, like, having a world where it is not unheard of for just the random person you meet at work to be playing, like, so a situation that happened, like, we got a brand new project manager, and at first glance, I never would have thought that he was a geek, but he happened to see, like, some stuff I had hanging up in my cube, and I have a green and a black mana symbol that someone made out of plastic canvas. And he stopped one day to ask me about my Golgari symbols. And just the fact that he called them that, like, was an immediate tell that, oh, hey, you've played Magic the Gathering, and he also plays D&D, and he plays all these other things. And we've had lengthy conversations about that, and that is not anything that I ever expected to happen at work.
Yeah. Somebody at work sheepishly admitted that they didn't know anything about D&D. But it was like a sheepish, like, I know I should, but I don't.
How times have changed.
And I think that what we've started to see more towards, like, this decade of accessibility, I think that because the audience has grown so much, it also opens the field for more niche things to show up again. Like, you can have all these interesting, creative, different one-offs because now you have a big enough audience for those to get some kind of traction.
Well, and advancements in printing and advancements in, fabrication have made it to where the barrier of entry on a lot of these products is way lower than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because you can get quality miniatures way easier just in the sheer fabrication department than it used to be.
What I really want, and what I'm surprised I don't see more of, is, and I think a lot of this is just there's not enough open game license in enough different systems. But I would really love to see more Paizos, more companies that are focused on writing content rather than writing game systems.
There are a few of these.
Green Ronin is an example.
Green Ronin is one. Rogue something. Rogue Genius Games is one.
This is very funny because I think of Green Ronin as mostly the game I see publishing a lot of the company I see publishing a lot of different types of systems.
I mean, they are. They came up. I think they have their own system now and are trying to publish everything under that rather than making content for other ones.
Yeah, I mean, really, I remember them being a big force during the 3rd edition thing, and they were releasing a ton of source books.
What I do think is really, really cool is the D&D 5 added the DM's Guild?
Yeah, DM's Guild.
DM's Guild. And so what that is...
Just a subsite of Drive-Thru RPG, but hey, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's a subsite of Drive-Thru RPG, but what you can do is, as a DM, you can post your written content, and it gets ratings, so other people can find the best content by what people have tried and rated. But you can also sell them.
Yeah, and
you get a cut.
That's the component that was missing from the early days of the internet, because like my favorite site, and I know I've talked about it before, was like Abe Deschel's World of Darkness, and it was just a bunch of collected source material that was originally published on Usenet, but he took it and collected it in a single place. So like if you wanted more source material for Mummy, because that was the game that you really liked playing, there was tons of source books for Mummy. But it was all just for free. Like there was no real way to take someone's effort and reward them for, you know, the time that they spent, you know, building this small project that, you know, never really saw the light of day. But we have way easier e-commerce options now, so it's relatively simple to pull together a way to have like a cost sharing type thing for someone to get a cut of every sale.
Yeah, and like I've sold a bunch of stuff on Dungeon Masters Guild because it's easy, relatively speaking. And admittedly, my stuff tends not to be the high. I don't tend to get like the highest possible ratings because I don't put art in there. I don't put art in what I've made, which is like a big thing that really pushes your content to the next level. But I've sold enough to keep me in books.
Nice. So yeah, I know you mentioned this last week because I did listen to the podcast, but Pathfinder 2 probably was one of my games of the year. And one of the things that I am looking for in a system is I actually really enjoyed 4th just because I found the combat really fun. I am also one of the like, oh man, I'm really upset that we never got to see a tactical RPG in that setting. I would love to see more game systems come out that really have a good idea of what are you going to be doing in this game, and how are we going to make those interactions enjoyable and interesting.
How do you mean?
Like, there's a lot of game systems are really focused on trying to make sure you can do anything. Like, we want to have a super generic system that allows for any possibility to be adjudicated via the system. And I find that leads to a kind of shallow, wide experience. Like, yeah, you can adjudicate anything, but nothing feels very deep.
Yeah. And I tend to like those a lot because it means that it's much more likely I can play the character I want to play and not feel like I'm fighting the system to play what I want to play.
I've always gravitated towards the GURPSian systems that like have rules for anything. Like
champions.
If you want to do this thing, then by God, there's a way to do it. Because like I always liked being able to build whatever the hell I wanted to. Like, you know, if I wanted to be a were-otter for some reason, then by God, there's rules to be a were-otter.
The first step is to come up with the character personality and concept, and then figure out how to make the rules do that. Versus looking at the rules and saying, hey, I like to put these things together. What kind of character does that make?
Because like when I played World of Darkness back in my high school and early college days, we played a blended every World of Darkness type of creature was playing together. So like 2 people wanted to be vampires, fine. Another one wanted to be a werewolf, fine. One wanted to be a mage, fine. We'll figure it out. Because like the systems were similar enough that I could kind of mash it all together to make it work.
That sounds like actual hell.
Yeah, it was fine.
Those systems were not balanced at the same scale to one another.
No, they weren't.
But yeah, but I've heard of people doing that.
I've seen it in practice. It's fine until a player stops playing nice.
Right. Like, you had to DM your way out of some problems. I also played a NPC of mine that was along that could sometimes bring things back into line when someone had gotten off the garden path. But yeah, I mean, it was doable. It was fun. But
to Coder's point, one of the things that I think Pathfinder 2 does that I think is neat is it offers a framework to combine those two things surprisingly well. There's a lot of pieces that you can kind of slot together. It's like you have a bunch of building blocks, and you can kind of building block your way into a surprising variety of functional characters, even though the game is very focused on deep systems. And for me, it doesn't quite get there, but I also feel like it can get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. It's for me a very much return to form of the modules that I've gotten. I did run a module of Starfinder, and I mostly was a little underwhelmed with it. And already in the first module that they've done for Pathfinder 2, there's a number of interesting encounters going on. It's very clear what the motivations of the various NPCs are. It's just mostly felt very easy to play. A lot of the stuff that my players are going to do has been anticipated.
Yeah, which is important if you're writing a module for somebody else to play. And has been the few times I've picked up a module and been like, do I want to run this? That's usually where I'm the most disappointed. It's like, okay, so what if they do this obvious thing that's not covered?
Yeah, it's very, there's a number, and the idea of the 3-action system also allows for some additional stuff going on in combat. Like, the very first encounter had a bunch of alternative uses of the character's actions, which to help get them out of a pretty hairy situation, which made it an interesting decision of, do we want to deal with this building that is on fire, or do we want to deal with the enemies that are around, the enemy that's in here?
Yeah, it's very interesting to me to see, and I think that one of the big things that I find exciting about Pathfinder 2 is that it's rethinking some very basic core rules that haven't been questioned or rethought in like 30 years.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen people with Move Minor Standard shirts, and the names have changed, but that's what you do on a turn for, 30 years of the most popular games. Like, even White Wolf games, you move, you act. Maybe you have a separate bonus thing that you might do as part of that, but that fits the same role. And I think they're still very, very carefully experimenting with it, because while they do have the 3-action system in play thus far from the player perspective, at least as much as I've played, it still feels like I'm Move Minor Standard, or I'm like moving and doing a standard action. And I can see what they're sort of trying to do from a add additional actions, but when those choices are all of your actions or have a normal turn, it doesn't feel that different. But I also like the potential there. There's a really, really good framework to build from. And I feel like most RPG systems, this is absolutely true of D&D 5 too, need a few years and a few book releases to really come into their own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I know we've had this discussion. It might just be fighters are the very versatile class.
Oh, yes.
But I have a ton of options at level 1 as to what my turn is going to look like. So even if I need to move, it can be my options can be, all right, do I want to move? And then if I'm going to attack, but I have 2 types of attacks. I can do a regular attack or a power attack. Power attack is going to be a ton of damage, but it costs me 2 actions. So that would leave me with out any actions remaining, and I might want to use my action to raise my shield so that I'm better protected. Or maybe I just want to get that damage in and then hopefully use my reaction to raise my shield if it becomes relevant. But if I do that, then I won't have my shield up to shield block, which is active mitigation. And in either of those cases, I won't have access to my attack of opportunity, which keeps enemies stuck to me. So there's a lot of thought that I put into every turn I take as a first level fighter.
Yeah, and I think that that's another big thing that it's a big thing that D&D 5. Well, it's a big thing that I think started with D&D 4 and has continued. Is making. It used to be that if you were a spellcaster, you had all of the interesting stuff. Your party babysat you until you got the power stuff, and then you were the center of the party because you were the most powerful. And 4th edition D&D simultaneously let casters be more castery all the time through continual basically cantrips, at will spells that you can always cast. So you always get to cast a spell. You don't have to throw a rock at somebody when you're not casting a spell or something equally lame. But you also, your overall power level is more in line with non-caster classes. And that trend has continued where more and more interesting stuff is being put into your martial classes, where it's oh, hey, do you want to just play a sword and shield fighter? You've got a ton of cool stuff you can do. You're not just going to walk up and hit things and that's your turn 100% of the time. You have techniques and moves and lots of options. And you don't, and at the same time, spellcasters have been pulled more and more back in line to something that's more reasonable. And I think that's good because it means that, hey, I can see why I would play a fighter. Previously, I can't imagine why you would play a fighter versus playing something that's like a fighter but with more cool stuff they can do.
I feel like 5th edition kind of shied back away from that after 4th.
I mean, there was an argument that 4th made the character classes a little too samey in that everybody had this many this power, this many that power, this many the other power.
Yeah.
And so I think it could make the classes feel a little bit too similar, and B, it didn't really feel like D&D anymore.
Well,
and I think specifically in 5th, they wanted it to feel like D&D again.
That's in a decent part because of the way they handled everything but combat.
Mm-hmm.
That game was not set up for doing anything in it other than fighting monsters.
Yeah, anything that was not combat, it was figure out how to do that thing.
Yeah.
Have fun.
And one of the things that I don't think we really talked about that I think is interesting is the way exploration happens in Pathfinder, because exploration and non-combat stuff had a role in other games, but there was there's a ritual I am going to go through to explain to my DM so that I optimize the pathway through this dungeon. I'm gonna crawl on my hands and knees, taking 20 every square so that I make sure I don't miss any traps, is a thing that you would say in a 30.5 game. And so Pathfinder, now you just have, what are you doing while you are exploring? Oh, you're searching? Or then when we come across something that's hidden, I will roll for your perception. And you don't need to tell me, oh, I'm going to be doing all of this active searching. It's just assumed. Here's how the rules work.
Yeah. There's a lot more. It takes the gotcha out.
Yeah.
I'm looking for traps. Until I say otherwise, what I am doing while I'm not fighting is looking for traps. I'm not going to find any treasure while I'm looking for traps, because I'm looking for traps. I'm not looking for treasure. Somebody else might be looking for treasure.
Yeah, but hopefully, you have a party, and
right.
different members of the party are doing different things, and so everything's covered.
Yeah, and different members of the party are good at different things, and so are more focused on those things.
And hopefully the person who's looking for treasure isn't playing a jerk who keeps it all for themselves.
Right. And yeah, I like I said, I really love the foundation that game is built on, and I'm looking forward to more of the stuff coming out for it. I mean, I've spent the last week iterating on basically my biggest complaint. One of my biggest complaints with it, and I really only have two, is I can't play the character I want to play. Like, it won't let me. And so I just made that character. I was like, yes, it's been a pretty heavy lift, and I've done a ton of research breaking down other classes to see like where the balance points are and like figuring out how to make it work properly. But like I like to think I've broadly gotten it to a point where I could play it in a game and it wouldn't be a problem. And with a bit more work, it would be, perfectly in line with other classes and fill a unique role.
Yeah.
But also, it's a system that I'm interested enough in to put that kind of effort into.
So, while we are kind of getting over time, I want to make sure we do not overlook one other pretty big thing in the past 10 years, which is just the explosion of Magic.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Wizards has definitely done some great stuff with D&D 5th edition. It sure feels like they have just completely been firing on all cylinders when it comes to Magic.
I feel like Wizards of the Coast has been firing on all cylinders this whole decade just amazingly. Like,
I mean, somewhat less scared of the internet now, like all around, and that's helped a lot.
Yep.
Not entirely unafraid of the internet, but we're getting there.
We're working on it.
Well, it was, 99 when Hasbro bought Wizards, and it probably took an entire decade for that cultural shift to work its way out, and now we've entered, or we're closing the 2010s, and I think all of that kind of worked its way out in all of the Wizards product lines. And they figured out how to market stuff, they figured out how to actually create content of repeatable quality. And that's not to say that there haven't been some stinker sets in Magic, but there are more good to fine sets than not.
They're also very clearly trying to... So they're trying to meet their players where they are. They're now officially announcing that, yep, Commander is the most popular way to play Magic.
Yeah, like, that was the big thing for me. I will not play Standard Magic. I am done forever with Standard Magic. And it's because I've been super burned on it, and it's not a format for me. But I'll play Commander.
Well, so like that's a big part of it, because like the first Commander products came out in 2009. That's like
I think.
The Commander theme decks was like a 2-deck set that came out in August of 2009. And then 2011 was the first set of 5 decks that we're familiar with.
Okay.
But like, it's them acknowledging that Commander was a thing and continuing to acknowledge it, because like, as far as products go, Commander has maintained its value more than any other products that they've released.
No kidding.
That it's a way to play the game that actually kind of links up a bit with the original concept of what this game was supposed to be simulating.
It's terribly funny to me because they do so much work to try. Like, I don't know what to make of it. Commander is not an accessible format.
That's not true.
I
You can
disagree.
go out and buy a 100-card deck
Yeah.
in the game store and play Commander.
Like, you're not going to be the most competitive person with that 100-card deck, but like, if you
get the right deck, you might be.
If you play a stock deck and your friend plays a stock deck and somebody else plays a stock deck, you can immediately get into a game.
Let me rephrase. The rules of Commander are the rules of comprehensive Magic.
Yes, and you mostly won't be exposed to them if you do that thing I just said.
It's true, but if you take that deck to a place where people are playing other decks, it suddenly is the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, but
that's always been true of Magic.
Yeah.
That's not anything new for Magic. That's just like
that was the case when I joined. Like I joined during Revised, and I was going to tournaments and seeing cards that I had never seen, and immediately having to figure out what to do with them because like I didn't have much Arabian Nights or I didn't have much Antiquities, but like people did.
Yep.
Wizards does a lot of work to try and ensure that its popular competitive formats don't involve rules interactions that are dumb.
Well,
they do now.
Yes.
Yeah, that. And I think that's been really good for its competitive games. And I think that's the crux of it, is that Commander is not a competitive format.
That's fair, but it does mean that you will, like, you might end up at a point where it's like, how does this work?
Yeah. But also, as Ash was commenting, like, because there are those starter decks, and that's sort of the expected entry point, and maybe you tune that deck to your personal preferences, but like broadly it's not, you're not going to be like breaking things, and they have interesting interactions. A lot of the people playing it aren't ever going to see those things, even though you can.
Call me when people playing Commander are, tearing up their cards to confetti to sprinkle over the playfield.
I mean, Chaos Confetti was a legal card 2 years ago.
It's true.
I was going to say, so it's not Commander, but there is going to be a new unset.
Yeah, but those are the unsets. Those are intentionally weird and stupid.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Oh, but yeah, this is the year of the Commander, apparently.
Yes, they are doing a bunch of stuff to support Commander this year.
There's a lot of stuff for Commander this year. I'm very excited. There's going to be Draft Commander.
I'm not entirely sure I'm interested in that, but okay.
I think I might be. But that also implies an entire set of randomized cards designed for Commander, which is cool.
It does imply that, and I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really, and one of the things that I think, sort of going back to the accessibility part and the like meeting players where they're at, is that because Commander isn't like, oh, did you like, if you want to make a Commander deck that just wins, you can. But like that, unlike regular Magic, that's not really the best way to play Commander. And so
you have 3 opponents rather than 1.
Sure. But like that's sort of part of it, is that it's a lot of the things that make a good standard Magic deck are not things that make good Commander decks, because the game is so fundamentally different, even though the rules are the same.
I guess the thing that I like about Commander is it is reminiscent of how I used to play Magic back in the day.
Yeah.
Where the game was long. So you had things in there to buffer the late game, because like you'd get to a point where like you're almost out of cards. Like, I need to heal myself now, or do other things to stay alive.
Yeah.
And it was different.
The game was long. The game was long. The cool stuff you could do wasn't, I win the game now. It was, I did a cool thing. So everybody gets to do their cool things most of the time.
I mean, the matches that we used to play were nonsense, because we'd have 100 to 200 card decks, and there'd be 6 or 7 of us sitting around the table, all playing against each other.
Yep. It was like dinner table Magic when you got 5 people, and nobody has a play set of anything, so your cards all have like 1 or 2 of everything.
You maybe had 2 Singer Vampires or Sarah Angels. Like, the guy that had Karma that decided to throw it on the table and immediately got the hate of everyone playing black only had the 1 Karma. So like, you just had to remove that 1 Karma. So you would do some wheeling and dealing to get someone to remove it, and then you would pay that back later. And like, that's the whole spirit that Commander still has that I miss from the early days of Magic.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like a Commander deck, with a Commander deck, I'm playing a spellcaster doing, fighting other spellcasters, because there's like a character that it's all centered around.
I will say that while Brawl does not seem to have taken off, Arena sure has made brought competitive Magic to a whole new audience.
Arena has been amazing.
Arena is the biggest component of what I mean when I say Wizards is no longer afraid of the internet.
Yes.
There's finally a way to play Magic the Online on your computer that doesn't suck.
Yep.
Arena wouldn't exist, though, were it not for Hearthstone.
It's true.
It's true.
Yeah, bringing it back to video games, this has been the year of digital tabletop, the decade. Like Hearthstone, we talked about Slay the Spire, which definitely feels like a weird amalgamation of Dominion Thunderstone meets a roguelike.
And it's also been really good for getting new people or bringing back old people into a lot of classic games. I mean, like, I think that the D&D 5 game I ran, more than half of the players were new.
That sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. And like, it worked. It wasn't too onerous to explain the rules to everybody. It wasn't overly unwieldy.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm enjoying about this resurgence is I get to like play games with new people, like not the people who aren't the same people that I've played over and over with again over the years, which I love playing with them too, and that's great. But also people who are actually new to the game itself and haven't internalized all of the baggage that those of us who've been playing for decades have.
Yeah, which makes the games have all sorts of new, interesting stuff that like you never think about doing. But somebody who doesn't have all of this background comes up with some completely new, like, oh, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Nobody ever thinks about doing that.
Also, I can have them find an imprisoned NPC who, wants to be rescued and not immediately assume that it's a trap and that they should kill them.
Right.
Which, if you played in first ed and second ed, that is the correct choice. Because it probably is.
I've decided already that if I ever come back to the pen and paper game that's run amongst us, I need to play a pacifist, because my instinct is always just kill everything, sort it out in the end, loot them, and go on.
Someone just needs to run a more combat-heavy game for you, Bell.
I know.
Yeah. I am the wrong person to do that because I play with 3 to 4 highly
ridiculous optimizers.
Highly systems aware, don't min-max because they have to think about not doing it optimizers. I cannot build encounters that will challenge people because I have to be smarter than 4 people. Than 4 people working together.
Yeah, like I knew I was bad business when we were playing Star Wars. I just decided to start attacking Imperials. And I was winning.
And that was fine.
Okay, I think at this point we've gone over any parting thoughts about this specific topic.
All this, and we didn't even get to talk about 40k 8th edition and Age of Sigmar.
No, I feel like that there may be a wargaming of the decade episode at some point, because like it has also evolved significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Although in most of the same ways.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel like the underlining trend here is accessibility and inclusiveness.
Yes. It makes for better games. It makes for more players, and more players means more game. Everybody wins.
Yep.
Okay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you.